If you ask why Nokia collapsed, in 2007, Apple released the iPhone, Google followed with Android, and Nokia simply failed to react. The evidence suggests a far more complex reality. Between 2007 and 2013, Nokia was acutely aware of the existential threat posed by modern smartphones. They did not die from complacency. They collapsed under the weight of internal turmoil and structural flaws. The company's inability to execute a successful counteroffensive was rooted in a toxic culture of fear, insurmountable technical debt, and executive decisions that ultimately erased tens of billions of dollars in shareholder value. The failure of the world's leading mobile phone manufacturer offers a specific look at how silos and fear-based management can dismantle a corporate empire. To understand the magnitude of this failure, you have to recognize the scale of Nokia's previous dominance. Dating back to 1865, they started as a pulp mill on a set of rapids in Finland, eventually evolving through rubber and cables into a global telecommunications titan. By the 1980s, the company was pioneering the mobile revolution with early cellular devices like the Mobira Senator. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Nokia became synonymous with cell phones, putting their nearly indestructible devices into the hands of an entire generation. This chart shows their absolute peak. In the third quarter of 2007, Nokia controlled 48.7% of the global smartphone market. Even when Apple launched the first iPhone that same year, Nokia was vastly outselling their new rivals. At the end of 2007, Apple accounted for 5% of smartphone sales, while Nokia held half the market. While their balance sheets projected absolute invincibility to the public, a hidden terminal decline had already taken root in their boardrooms. During the late 2000s, Nokia's internal culture fractured into two paralyzed groups. Top management faced immense external pressure from shareholders to maintain quarterly metrics. Middle management, however, feared their own superiors. Top executives lacked deep software competence. They were historically hardware executives who managed operations through business cases and financial models, projecting their anxiety downward through an aggressive management style marked by shouting and threats of demotion. Because leadership demanded aggressive product timelines and penalized dissent, middle managers engaged in pluralistic silence. Delivering bad news or admitting their operating systems were technologically inferior became career suicide, so they filtered the information flowing upward. This led to normalized data manipulation. In documented instances, supervisors instructed analysts to move the data points to the right on development charts, presenting a favorable, albeit fictional, impression of timeline progress to the board. The internal promotion structure favored a blind can-do attitude. Securing funding for a department required teams to overpromise on deliverables, committing to timelines they knew they couldn't meet. The result was temporal myopia. Because top management believed the optimistic reports generated by middle management, they pushed software systems to market that were riddled with bugs and architectural compromises just to meet artificial deadlines. When executives cannot independently verify technical claims and rule through intimidation, their vision becomes disconnected from operational reality. In this environment, the strategic decisions coming from the top were based on data that simply did not exist. While the emotional layer of the company fostered blindness, a physical barrier prevented Nokia from executing a counteroffensive, a crippling accumulation of technical debt. Nokia's Symbian operating system was designed for an era of physical keypads and resource scarcity. Its architecture was built to minimize memory usage and maximize battery life, making it incompatible with the modern multi-touch app ecosystem. Unlike iOS or Android, Symbian lacked modularity. Whenever Nokia created a new mobile phone, software engineers had to branch the codebase, creating a custom, incompatible version of the operating system for that specific hardware. This visualization shows the bottleneck. In modern software engineering, translating written C++ into machine code takes seconds. For Symbian, compilation took an astonishing 48 hours. If an engineer wrote a simple patch, it took 2 weeks just to see that code tested in a live device build, making it impossible to match the iteration cycles of Apple or Google. Nokia was attempting to win a software war using an antiquated hardware playbook. With a system this convoluted, the organization lost its ability to pivot, regardless of its financial resources or market share. By late 2010, market share was plunging. The board ousted their CEO and brought in Stephen Elop, a former Microsoft executive tasked with executing a radical turnaround. In early February 2011, Elop authored the Burning Platform memo. He delivered an accurate internal diagnosis, stating that competitors were taking market share with entire ecosystems and that Nokia's own software was uncompetitive. This graph tracks their market share during the transition. At the start of 2011, Nokia was still holding on to 24% of the market. But just days after the memo leaked, Elop announced a total shift to Microsoft's Windows Phone, publicly declaring their current Symbian platform dead. The first Windows devices were roughly 9 months away from hitting store shelves. Telecommunications carriers immediately canceled orders, consumers stopped buying them, and market share entered a free fall, plummeting to 14% by the third quarter of 2011. The irony is that Nokia actually had a viable internal alternative. In June 2011, they released the N9, featuring an intuitive swipe-based interface completely devoid of physical buttons. It was a technological triumph that met strong consumer demand, yet Elop rigidly maintained that the platform would be canceled regardless of its success. By publicly trashing their active revenue source and strangling a praised internal lifeboat to force reliance on an unproven Windows platform, leadership permanently severed any chance of a recovery. By late 2012, Nokia's smartphone market share bottomed out at 3.5%. A year later, Microsoft acquired their devices and services business for $7.2 billion, a fraction of its peak valuation. The downfall of this empire leaves several key lessons. First, psychological safety is a strategic requirement. When employees fear retaliation for delivering bad news, data reaching the boardroom will always be manipulated, leaving executive leadership blind to operational realities. Second, we learn that technical debt eventually paralyzes execution. Accumulating it to meet short-term product deadlines creates a loss of agility that no amount of marketing can overcome. Third, communication timing is as critical as the strategy itself. Diagnosing a systemic failure requires internal honesty, but broadcasting that failure to the public before a replacement product is ready to ship guarantees a massive revenue gap. Nokia spent billions on research and development. They possessed some of the greatest engineering minds in Europe and actively attempted to build touchscreens, app stores, and new operating systems. They had the tools to win, but they defeated themselves from the inside out. The devices that once defined global communication for an entire generation are now just forgotten relics, sealed away in dark desk drawers. Absolute market dominance is simply never permanent. Technical debt will eventually stall execution, and a corporate culture that punishes the truth will ultimately find its strategy failing to meet the reality of the market.